Hey there, Kyla. This is Homai. Anyways, I am sorry. I've been crazy busy. In fact, I don't really have time right now, but I'm going to try to get some of this down because I know you have the exam tomorrow. Um, anyways, so let's take a look here. There's a website you might consider checking out. Um, it's musictheory.pugetsound.edu, and they kind of break down their whole. They got a nice basic explanations on a lot of their concepts. But let's kind of go down the line here. So the first concept I want to talk about is a motif or a motive. Motif, of course, is the French word. And essentially, this is a small idea, a musical idea. It could be rhythmic, it could be melodic. But basically, you're trying to say, okay, what's the smallest, most basic idea I can identify as an idea? So it's not going to be a single note. So, for example, you can see in this example to give you some examples of motifs or motives, right? So that's an example of motif, or there's a motif again. Here's a repetition of the second motif, and the third motif, and the fourth motif. Okay, so we can take a look at a lot of pieces of music. Let me see if I can pull up the example that you have here, that you sent. Yeah, let me pull the example that you have here. And this way I can also show you how the motifs exist. And music is made up, we know, of notes, right? Notes can then be put together into motifs, which is, I think, of the smallest component. Sometimes some theorists will call them germs, even smaller than motifs, but I think that's getting a little crazy there because it's like, yeah, it's small enough. But let's see here if I can show you my view here. So give me just this dropboard view, I think. Yeah, there we go. All right, so yeah, so looking right over here. So what are some motivic elements? Well, this, if we just, and usually when you're looking at motifs and you're doing analysis, you're really looking mainly at the melody. That's really important. Because you look at everything, it's like, oh, there's so much going on. Well, just look at the melody. The melody is this. Okay? Right? That's the melody. So I would look at this and say, okay, bum, ba, da, dum. That's a motif. Right? And Mozart gives us a clue. You can see there's a slur here. Okay, then you can say, okay, we can call that motif 1 if we're identifying this as a motif, motif 1. Now, it doesn't look like he's asking you to do this, okay, but I'm just showing you how to identify motifs. Here's another motif. Here's another motif. Here's another motif. I would say that this is combined as one motif, right? And then let's say, okay, well, where do you see the first motif again? Bum, 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 bum. Well, it happens again here. See that? So that would be motif 1. Where do we see this motif before? How about here? You see? So even though the notes are different, it's ascending eighth notes, stepwise motion. So these are all examples of motifs. Here's another motivic element. And we could even say that this is really the same motif twice if you wanted to call it, because they share the same rhythmic elements, right? In fact, we can look here and say, well, what about this one? Well, you could make the argument that this is derived from the first motivic element here. Quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth. You see? So here's this motif here. So each of these are all examples of short motifs. So that's really important to understand how it all builds up. So essentially, we have notes that group together to form motifs. Motifs group together to form subphrases. Okay, now this is where it can get a little confusing. What's a subphrase? Well, it's a group of motivic elements put together that forms partial phrases. Partial phrases is the key. It's not a complete phrase. Okay, so you got motifs, you put them together to form subphrases. Then subphrases come together, usually 2 or 3 or 4 of them, come together to form complete phrases. How do you know that you have a complete phrase? Easy. All right, when you're singing the melody or listening to the melody, ask yourself this: where are the punctuation marks? You're looking for commas or periods or question marks or exclamation marks. If it was a sentence, where would you put the punctuation? And typically a phrase will end on a cadence, right? So that's going to be like a half cadence ending on 5, or a deceptive cadence ending on a 6. or an authentic cadence ending on 1, or plagal 4/1, but it's going to be a cadence. So that's really important to note. So notes together form motifs. Motifs together form subphrases. Those are usually pretty small. Subphrases together form phrases. Now, then we can go up the ladder from there, okay? So if you understand that, then you're on the right track. Let's go back to your example let's go back to the website here, because it's a really great website. You should definitely check it out. musictheory.pugetsound.edu. That's Puget sound.edu. All right, so they're just showing you some different motivic elements. Here's a motif, 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 right? That very short German of an idea. So if we go to the idea of a subphrase, let's take a look here. So they're larger than motifs, and they're generally combinations of motivic elements, right? So if we take a look, don't stop thinking about tomorrow, don't stop, it'll soon be here, right? So the famous song, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. And notice that we can say, okay, well, obviously, don't stop thinking about tomorrow, don't stop, it'll soon be here. That's obviously our phrase, all right? So phrase A. But we can break that into two subphrases because, look, it repeats. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, don't stop, it'll soon be here. So notice there's a similarity, which is why this first subphrase is called subphrase A, and the second one is subphrase A prime. Here's another example, okay, that they give you here. Look at it. The rhythm, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4, right? And this is a good example because you can see rhythmically, the notes kind of change here, but rhythmically, look how the rhythm of these two bars is very similar to these two bars. The rhythm starts the same way here, okay? So even though, and it's a bit different, so if you take a look here, 1, tonight, everybody just have a good time, right? So we know that famous song. And in this case, they're arguing that this is subphrase B's. And I would say yes, because even though the rhythm is somewhat similar, the melody kind of changes, right? So that's why this is subphrase A. Party rock is in the house tonight. Changes. Everybody just have a good time, right? And in this case, those are your subphrases. So in this case, the subphrases are 2 bars. And usually subphrases are 2 bars long. Okay, so if you need help understanding, that's typically going to be the case because phrases are usually 4 measures long. Sometimes they'll be 8 measures long, but usually 4 measures. Okay, so let's take a look at the Mozart example and see if we can get a better idea, understanding of what a subphrase would be here. So in this case, I want to find out where the first phrase is. Where's the first place where I'm like, this feels like a cadence. Okay, so I'm going to play this for you. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That's the cadence, right? And he's marked it for you, says cadence. And we can tell. And this is a half cadence, right? Because it ends on the 5 chord. We're in E flat major. This is a 5 chord. And you can hear that's very incomplete sounding, so a half cadence. And so this is a pretty short phrase because you're saying, well, this is really only 1.5 measures, almost, well, basically 2 measures long. So how would you divide this into subphrases? Bum, ba, da, 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 dum. That would be the ba, da, da, dum, bum, ba, dum. I don't know that I would necessarily argue that there's a subphrase in this particular section. Let's go a little further and see if we can find an actual one. A subphrase, in order for a subphrase to make sense, it has to kind of have a break, like a sense of a comma, right? I would say there is no comma there. It's kind of a continuous idea. So it's you have phrase A, and then it's this phrase A prime, because it starts almost the same. And usually that's how you know. Just look at the beginning of an idea. If the beginning is the same, call it the same. So this is bum ba da dum, goes up and down, bum ba da dum. Definitely phrase A prime. Makes sense? So this is phrase A prime because it starts the same way. It changes and it goes back to a 1 chord, right? Okay, in this case, it is technically an inauthentic cadence because you don't have the bass in root position. Okay, so that's why it's not a PAC, not perfect authentic cadence, but an imperfect authentic cadence. Okay. So an IAC at this point, So that's how I'd analyze this. So basically, this would be, you name your key E flat major, and then you would say, okay, well, this is my, I'm going to call this phrase A. Then this would be phrase A prime, and phrase A ends on a half cadence. Phrase A prime ends on a imperfect authentic cadence, and this is, of course, your dominant chord here. All right. Let's take a look at measure 5 here, because here I think this is a longer idea. Let's take a listen to the melody. Right? So here we obviously have a longer idea. Okay. Now, we could argue that this is a phrase, end of a phrase. You could say, hey, I think this is actually an end of a phrase. Or you could argue that this is just a subphrase from here to here. And it all depends on how you hear it. So that's one thing about music theory, including form analysis, is that it is largely subjective. You just have to have reasonings for your arguments, right? So again, listening to it. And that's obviously the half cadence there, okay? So two ways you can argue it. You can say, I've got a cadence here, or you don't. And in this case, you can see there is no cadence marked here. So if you're following the indications here, you might say, I've got a subphrase to here and a second subphrase. And in this case, this would be subphrase A, and this would be subphrase B, because they are different, ending on the half cadence, and then together they form one longer phrase, right? So that's the concept of the subphrase. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense to you now. Let me look at the email to see what else you have here. Okay, so subphrase, phrase. All right. Well, phrase, that's easy, okay? A phrase is basically a short musical sentence, right? And like I said, they end on a cadence, and they tend to feel like ends of cadences or ends of sentences. I've got sunshine on a cloudy day. That's a phrase, right? Yeah, so all these are examples. I'm every woman, it's all in me. Another example of a phrase. Now, phrases don't always have to sound complete, because phrases can end on half cadences. Okay? So here's an example of a longer phrase. You must not know me or know about me. You must not know about me. I can have another. So a longer phrase idea. Here's another example of a nice long phrase. Let's take a listen to this one here. Okay, so you could argue, right, that this is a phrase here. Bum 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 ba da 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 dum. You could say that that's a phrase, and you would not be incorrect. Bum 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 ba da 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 dum. So if you did that, you might say phrase A and phrase A prime or B, right? It starts very similar, but it's not exactly the same. So, or you could say subphrase A, subphrase B, or subphrase B A prime. Both are arguable. So you might be like, well, I just want to know an answer. How do I just? The point is, there are multiple answers. So if we take a look rhythmically, bum 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 ba da da dum, bum 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 ba da da dum. Notice the rhythm's identical, right? So that's the argument for subphrase A, subphrase A prime. But the fact is the notes are different. The chords are different. That's an argument for subphrase B. If you want to be on the safe side, in this case, I would say subphrase B. But if you wanted to argue for subphrase A, you would simply say the reasoning is because the rhythms are identical in the texture, and you would be correct. Okay. Yeah. So, and lots of examples here, and each of these you can play. You see, that's what's nice about this website. So I'll cover some things, but hopefully you're able to take this a little bit further. So let's go ahead and jump over to your next thing that you asked about, which is sentences. Okay, sentences. All right, what's a sentence? Well, sentence is different than a phrase. Okay, so this is very important distinction. Phrases can usually be divided into, well, regular phrases are divided into an antecedent and a consequent, which hopefully I'll have time to talk about here. I got to go quick because I've got a lesson soon. But to understand this, a sentence is a phrase basically that has a sequence. Really, really important to understand. It has sequences. And what's a sequence? A sequence is a motivic element that's repeated, usually up a step or up a third. It jumps around. So let's take a look at this example that they give us, for example. All right. So we have a motif. It repeats. And here's kind of fragments of the second half of it. Right? And it closes, right? So this is a phrase. So understand a sentence is a type of phrase. It's, it's a type of phrase. But the difference is because usually you have to have a sequence in order for it to be a sentence, okay? It has to have a sequence. And of course, a sequence is like a motivic element that's repeated, right? So let's take a listen to this phrase that happens to also be a sentence. This is your first motif, and the sequence descends. Now it changes. Ends on a half cadence. That is a sentence. All right? Here's another example of a sentence, this time in Beethoven. Here's our motivic element. Second motif. The two motifs repeat a little higher. A new motif, which also sequences. Right? So there you have, also a half cadence. So when you're looking at examples, look for repetitions. The moment you see a repetition of a small subphrase or motivic idea, you have a sequence. Okay, so you need motif 1, motif 2, combined for subphrase A prime, because it's almost identical, just moves up a little bit. Then the second motif repeats. You see that? How this motif is the same rhythmically as here. Dotted quarter, triplet 16ths followed by a quarter. Dotted quarter, triplet 16ths followed by a quarter. That's how you know it's the same motif. Motifs are mostly rhythmic. I repeat, motifs are mostly rhythmic. That's like something to remember, okay? Obviously, they can be intervallic as well, but the rhythms really matter. All right, so hopefully you now understand what a sentence is. All right, let's see, what time do we have for? Okay, let's talk about periods. Periods are really important to understand, and they're super, 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 super easy to understand. Okay, so let me, let's see, they have a section on periods here too, so that's why I was, see, phrase groups, okay, here it is. All right, the period. So what's a period? A period's really simple. It's just a group of at least two phrases where the second phrase ends with a more conclusive cadence. That's all it is. That's all it is. So it's two phrases. They can be similar or they can be different. If they're similar, that's what you would call a parallel period. You might have heard the term parallel period, okay? That means you have phrase A and phrase A prime, where phrase A ends in, say, a half cadence and phrase A prime ends in, say, an authentic cadence. Okay, it could be ISE or PAC. A contrasting period is where they're completely different. And when I say completely different, I mean they start differently. So remember, if it starts similarly, it's the same. You're going to call it phrase A and phrase A prime. If the second phrase starts differently, you're going to call it phrase B. If they're different, you got a contrasting period. That's what it is. So simple to understand. So if we take a look at this Mozart example again, okay? So the first phrase goes like this. Half cadence, you can hear that. Second phrase, starts exactly the same, so it's going to be phrase A prime. And then perfect authentic cadence, right? So we would call this a parallel period, okay? And you could, of course, diagram it. This is how you diagram it, right? So we have phrase A, lowercase a, phrase A prime here, where the first cadence is half and the second cadence is the PAC. And then you would just above it, mark another bracket that says parallel period. Parallel period. Boom. Super easy. So what does a contrasting period look like? Okay. They're just showing you others. Okay. So contrasting period. Here's an example of a contrasting period. This is Beethoven here. Here's phrase A. Half cadence. Here's this phrase B. Perfect authentic cadence. Okay. So you can hear how it's clearly identifiable that this is the end of phrase A, which is almost always going to be 4 bars, like I said, and it's a half cadence. And then the second phrase doesn't start the same. First melody is ba da 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 dum. Second melody bum bum ba da dum. It starts differently. Phrase B. It's that easy. So if you were diagramming this, phrase A, phrase B, phrase A ends in a half cadence, phrase B ends in a perfect authentic cadence, and you would bracket the whole thing and say contrasting period, just like that. Now, what is an antecedent and what is a consequent? Well, it's really easy. The first part of a period is always the antecedent. The second part of a period, the second phrase of a period, is always the consequent. Now, you can have multiples, like more than just 2 phrases, okay? So or even, you might have antecedent, antecedent, consequent. They don't have an example of that here, okay? But that would be like basically, you've got 3 phrases, right? That kind of, like for example, I could turn this into it, right? So let's say, ba-da-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum bum 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 ba-da-da-dum. Maybe he does the same, and then finally he changes, ba-da-dum bum ba-dum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum ba-dum ba-dum. If he did that, that would be antecedent, antecedent, consequent. That's very rare. I doubt you'll see that on an exam, but I just want you to know that that does exist. You can have a 3-phrase period. Now, it's not always 2 phrases, okay? You also have something known as a repeated phrase. I don't think that was covered in your class. Repeated phrase is when they're literally end in the same cadence. So they're the same, but they end in the same cadence. The music can change, mind you, but the melody is identical and the cadence is the same. All right, so in this case, now, in your exam, you would probably, if you don't have repeated phrase, you would still call this a parallel period and just call this phrase A and phrase A again without calling it A prime because of the same. Or you could call it A prime. You'd still get it correct if I was grading your paper because some of the other notes change. So that's indicative that, you could argue for A prime. All right? Really, really simple. So hopefully that helps you understand that. So what about a phrase group? Okay, so let's take a look at a phrase group. I don't know if you covered double periods. Double periods are really simple. Double period, let's take a look at that. I don't know if you did, so just so you know. A double period is basically when you take A, B, A, B. That's all it is, so take a look. In this case, we have phrase A, phrase B, and it repeats, phrase A, phrase B. Okay, but in this case, in order for this to work, they have to be the same. So the melody has to be the same. And a very important thing, the first cadence must usually be a half cadence, okay, for phrase B. So if you see AB and it ends in half cadence, and AB again that ends in, say, an authentic cadence, you definitely have an argument for a double period, where you would call the first period the antecedent group and the second period the consequent group, right? But I don't know if you actually had that, all right? So this is just theorist. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but it's pretty simple. AB, half cadence, AB, authentic cadence, phrase group, or a double period. Let's go to the phrase groups here. So I don't know how it's being taught in your textbook, but different textbooks teach it differently. And this one, I don't like the definition that most textbooks give for this, but phrase groups basically are what I just described. When I said that you can have like 3 phrases together, some people call that not a period anymore, but they'll call it a phrase group. So in this case, let me show you. The definition given in this book, and may not be the same, consists of 2 phrases whose melody begins similarly and has a final phrase ending in a half cadence, right? So basically, it's exactly like a period, but it doesn't end on an authentic cadence. So it's exactly like a period, but it doesn't end on authentic cadence. Instead, it ends on a half cadence. That's the definition given by this book. Now, I'm not a fan of that definition because how does phrase group equate to a half cadence? It doesn't in my mind, okay? So I don't like that one, but check your book to see if that's the case, right? Phrase chain, okay, exists in this text here that they're using. I don't know if you had phrase chains, but um, so here's another, so basically their definition of phrase chain, okay, also ends in half cadence, but it consists of phrases with contrasting melodies. So the definition in this book is a phrase group has similar melodies, so you have to have phrase A prime, ending in a half cadence. For phrase chains, you must be phrase A, phrase B, ending in a half cadence. That's the only difference given here, okay? So that's what that is. All right. Cadential extension. Cadential extension is really, really simple. It's basically when a composer gets to the end, you get a cadence, and they repeat the cadence a bunch of times. Like say, you go from 5-1. I guess I'll just show you with the piano here, because I go fast. I'm running out of time. 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1. That's a cadential extension. All right. I can think of some pieces that have cadential extensions. So let's say let's take a look at a sonata by Beethoven. Okay. Let me find this here. Opus 49, number 2. Here we go. All right, so let me show you this here. Okay, so I know it looks kind of complicated, but just bear with me here. So basically, at the end of this exposition, he goes, that's the cadence, the perfect authentic cadence here. But then he adds his extension. There's nothing new happening harmonically. It's 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 1-1. Okay, so if you listen to the music, you can really feel that this is the moment of finality here. One authentic cadence. That's basically what a cadential extension is. Okay, so hopefully that is making sense so far. I'm trying to cover as much of what you have as I can. So I know I'm moving fast, but you can slow down the video. You can review it. That's why I like doing videos. Let's go on to the question you had on form, binary form, for example. Okay, this is so easy to understand, but let's just make sure that you do understand it. Okay, so let me jump to, and again, this is a great website. It's in here too. Where was binary form? Okay, here we go. Boom. Period. Elision. I don't think you guys covered elision. That's basically where the end of a phrase overlaps with the beginning of a new phrase. Where is form? We don't care about this here. We don't care about that. And they have these summaries here that's really helpful. Like, I really like this chart. Check out this chart out, okay? So it tells you if you have two phrases, you have either a parallel period, contrasting period, phrase group, phrase chain, or repeated phase. And they tell you the structure, the melodic scheme, right? I love this. This is a great little chart here to study, okay? So 3 phrases, you can have an asymmetrical period. I don't think you covered that, so it's cool. All right, 4 phrases, what it can be, double period or repeated period. All right, anyways, I like that one a lot. So this is just a great website. Let's see, why am I not seeing form? Let me see if I can find it. Mode mixture, no, augmented 6, modulation. Oh, here we go, binary. Great. So bi means 2, of course. All right, so binary form. And binary must have an A and a B. That's the main thing that you have to understand, okay? And so let's go ahead and talk about, let's see, how this works. All right, so the easiest way to understand this, they're going to make this too confusing, aren't they? All right, they're doing kind of long ideas. All right, so first of all, let's talk about sectional. I'd rather you understand clearly what binary is. So binary form is where you have an A section, a complete A section. Then you'll have a B section that is typically shorter and typically incomplete, that ends with the second part of the A section again. All right, or you can have a simple binary, which is just an A and a B with no return to A. If you return to A, it's called rounded binary. Okay, so let's just understand what sectional is. So sectional basically it refers to, if it's sectional, it means it sounds complete. That's all it means. Okay, the A section ends on the tonic, right, which is just the one. So for example, let's take this song for example. Guten Abend, gute Nacht, Mut in Rosen bedacht. That's the first phrase. Mieten allein besteckt. Right? Notice how every single one of these phrases, it's complete. Do you hear how that sounds complete? The first section, and sections of music, by the way, is comprised by phrases. So if you weren't clear, if I wasn't clear, notes make up motifs. Motifs make up subphrases, which make up phrases. Phrases combine to form sections, right? So in this first section here, we have phrase 1 and phrase 2. Or you could call it phrase A and phrase, B if you wanted to, okay? And if you look at the end of the first section, it ends on a 1 chord. Therefore, this is sectional. Why is it called sectional? Because the first part sounds complete. You almost don't need a continuation. It already sounds like a completion. So it's sectional. The second section also ends on a 1 chord. You see that? Phrase 3 and 4 also ends on a 1 chord. Therefore, it also really feels sectional. You could do sing from the second section to the end of the second section, or the beginning of the first section to the end of the first section, and it would still sound complete. You would not be wanting for more music necessarily. Okay, that's what sectional means. So sectional means it's every section ends on the tonic chord, so it sounds complete. Continuous just means it doesn't end on the tonic chord. It means that the music is asking for more basically at the end of each section. And this applies to binary. It also applies to ternary form. Okay, so you can have continuous and sectional binary. You can have continuous and sectional ternary, although I don't think that was on your list, so maybe you guys didn't explore that. All right, not a problem. Let's talk about balanced binary. Okay, what does balanced mean? Okay, so when it comes to binary form. Okay, so again, definitions vary depending on the textbook. Okay, but essentially, balanced form features where the first section, the A section, ends in a new key, while the second section returns back to the original key. That's all it is, okay? So when you're analyzing your piece, if your first section ends in a new key and the section returns to the first key, it's what we call balanced. That's all that means, okay? So you change keys. If you don't change keys, it's not going to be balanced. Now, another way of thinking of this, because sometimes it can be a little confusing, another component that I think is important for balance is that the ending of both sections must be similar. Must be similar, okay? So basically, the first section ends in the new key, but it uses the same material in the original key at the end of the second section, right? So I can show you an example of this. Actually, this same sonata has a great example. So take a look at this ending here that I just played for you earlier, that cadential extension. Let me go back to this so you can see this. The cadential extension right here. One. Okay? But we changed keys because we started in G major, now we're in D major, which is the dominant key. Look at the end of this piece. All right? And we're... Okay? He gives us the same ending. This would be what we would call balanced, because you say the first one is in the new key. End of the first section is in the new key. And we take the same material, we transpose it to the original key, and place it at the end of the second section. That would create a balanced binary form. Okay, you could also call it balanced rounded binary form, especially if you come back to the A, which honestly you probably are. So I would say a balanced simple binary form is going to be a lot less common than balanced rounded binary form. So hopefully that's making sense to you. Okay, I think I got time to maybe cover one more topic. Um, all right, so let's see what's important to talk about here. Rounded binary versus ternary form. This is something that confuses a lot of people. So let's talk about that. Okay, distinguishing between rounded binary and ternary form. Okay, I think this explanation that they use here is a little confusing too. I'll make it very simple for you. Okay, very very simple. If the B section, the second section, okay, is very short and requires the almost like the A section's return, you're definitely dealing with rounded binary. If the B section is much more complete, longer, more developed, okay, then you're dealing with more of a ternary form. Okay, so that's proportion is what they're talking about. What's the proportion of the A section versus the B section? Another way to tell is going to be material, right? So if the material is completely brand new, for example, and whatnot, that also affects it. But I would say proportion is going to be pretty much all you need for that. So that's how I would recommend that you do it. And there's a little bit more detail here. But again, I have seen so many different definitions depending on the textbook. So again, I think proportion is kind of the key there. Okay, and maybe we'll look at sonata allegro form. Sonata allegro form, and I noticed there were a lot of questions about here. Like, okay, so what's exposition? Exposition is the first part of sonata allegro form. It's almost always super easy to spot. Okay, so this is a sonata. How do we spot the exposition? Well, it's the beginning for sure. Oops, I need to change my screen. It's the beginning for sure, right? All the way to the repeat sign or double bar line, okay? Or a major key change. Here we go to minor here, right? So this is the exposition of this piece. You can visibly see it. It's like just, you can spot it. Okay, so there are some parts to the exposition that you had questions about. For example, the medial caesura. Medial caesura. What's a medial caesura? Well, a medial caesura is simply a pause. It's a pause after a section. Where is our first major pause? If we look at this, it's right here. And the medial caesura usually ends at the first of the first section, which is this here. Okay, and before the B theme comes in, B theme enters. Okay, which is usually more lyrical. So if you listen to this, here's the A theme. Here's the B theme. Notice a change in mood. This is more lyrical. This is the B theme, the second theme. And at the end of the A theme, or let's see, there's an actual pause. That is a medial caesura, okay? And that's always going to fall between themes in an exposition. That's really important to note, okay? Between themes of, so what's a P theme? That's a primary theme. This is your primary theme right here. What's the S theme? That's a secondary theme. That's this theme right here. Primary theme, medial caesura, secondary theme right there, okay? What's a transition? A transition is anything that takes you between themes. In this case, we could argue, let's see. You could argue, if you wanted to argue that this is a transition. This from here to here is a transition. You can also argue that it's not a transition. You're fine either way, okay? Transitions basically exist, music between themes. If there's something they say, yeah, this is not really thematic, but a lot's happening here that leads to another theme, that would be a transition. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so what about development? Well, development's the beginning of this next section here, major new key. How do you know it's development? We're taking original thematic material. Notice this similarities here in the beginning, right? It begins, development begins to combine the elements, shortens them, and develops the themes. That's what's happening in development. You're developing existing themes. Recapitulation. What's a recapitulation? That's the return of the A theme, which happens right here. Okay? So pretty simple to understand. Actually, I told you here, but it's actually up here. Let's see here. Okay, that covered a lot of what you had. I know I didn't touch on the fugal stuff. I hope this is helpful for you. This is kind of a crash course explanation how I like to think of these concepts. So if you do have trouble in theory, try to let me know ahead of time so that I have a little bit more time. My schedule's crazy busy, but I am happy to make videos to help you guys out. Please share this with all your friends, anyone else that you think can benefit from this. I'm going to make this an unlisted video just because I'm addressing you directly and your questions. It's not really generalized for the public. I would prefer to take time and go through really detailed explanations for my actual videos that are available to the public. So anyways, hope you're doing well. Take care, Kyla, and I hope this helps you on your exam tomorrow. Good luck.